Viewers, you are welcome to Koyeb Ranch. If you are new to this platform, please like, subscribe, and share for new updates anytime new videos are released. In this episode, I am going to share information about cattle feedloting. A feedlot is a plot of land on which livestock are fattened for the market. It intensively manages cattle or other animals in a relatively small area and feeds them primarily on grains until they are ready for processing for human consumption. Therefore, cattle feedlot is a way of fattening cattle in a confined space with a balanced ration of grains and hay. This can help achieve consistent quality beef that meets market demand. Before you can set up a cattle feedlot, there are some factors you need to take into account or consider. These factors include financial analysis, the feedlot facility, the cattle selection, feed ration, health and welfare of the cattle, and then marketing. Let's examine each of these various factors. Financial analysis. The first step to take to start a feedlot operation is to do a financial analysis to assess the viability of the enterprise. You need to know the feed requirements, the cost of the feed, the buying and selling price of cattle, the break-even cost, and the expected profit margin. To do this, you need to have a clear idea of the type, weight, and the number of cattle you want to feedlot. The duration of the feeding period, your target market specifications, and the feed ration you want to use. You also need to factor in the fixed and variable costs associated with the feedlotting facility, such as land, labor, equipment, utilities, and maintenance. You can use a calculator or spreadsheet to estimate the income and expenditure of your feedlot operations. You can also consult with an extension agent, a feedlot consultant, or financial advisor to help you with the analysis. The goal is to determine whether the feedlot is feasible and profitable for your situation. Feedlot facility. The second step to start a feedlot operation is to build or rent a suitable feedlot facility. You need to consider the size, site, water, feeding equipment, manure management, and environmental impact of the feedlot. You also need to comply with the relevant regulations and standards. The site of the feedlot should be well drained, leveled, and accessible. It should have adequate water supply and quality, as well as electricity and fencing. It should be located away from the residential area, water sources, and sensitive ecosystems to minimize the risk of odor, noise, and pollution. The size of the feedlot depends on the number and type of cattle you want to feedlot, the space requirement per animal, and the layout of the pens, alleys, and gates. You need to provide enough space for the cattle to move, eat, drink, and rest comfortably. You also need to allow for expansion and flexibility in case of changes and the weather. The water system of the feedlot should provide clean and fresh water to the cattle at all times. You need to install water troughs, pipes, valves, and pumps that can deliver sufficient water pressure and volume to the pens. You also need to monitor and maintain water quality and quantity regularly. The feeding equipment of the feedlot should be designed to deliver feed ration to the cattle efficiently and accurately. You need to choose the type and size of the feeders, mixers, wagons, and scale that suit the feedlot operations. You also need to clean and calibrate your feeding equipment frequently. The manure management of the feedlot should be planned to handle a large amount of manure produced by the cattle. You need to collect, store, and dispose of the manure in a way that minimizes the environmental impact and minimizes the nutrient value. You can use methods such as composting, spreading, or selling the manure as fertilizer. The environmental impact of the feedlot should be assessed and mitigated to protect the natural resources and the public health. You need to follow the best management practices and environmental regulations for the feedlot industry. You also need to obtain necessary permits and licenses for your feedlot operations. Cattle selection. The third step to take to start a feedlot operation is to select the right type of cattle for feedlot or feedlotting. You need to consider the weight, condition, health, genetics, and market specifications of the cattle. You also need to prepare them for the feedlot by vaccinating, deworming, and castrating them. The weight of the cattle determines the length and cost of the feeding period. You need to choose the cattle that have the optimal weight for your target market and your feedlot capacity. You also need to weigh the cattle before and after the feedlot to measure the performance and profitability of your feedlot operation. The condition of the cattle affects the feed intake and the growth of the cattle. You need to choose cattle that have good body condition score and a healthy appetite. Feed ration. The fourth step to take in setting up a feedlot operation is to design a balanced and economical feed ration for your cattle. You need to consider the fiber, energy, protein, minerals, and vitamin requirements of your cattle. The fiber requirements of the cattle is the minimum amount of roughage needed to maintain the rumen function and digestive health of the cattle. You need to provide at least 10% of the dry matter intake as fiber, such as hay, silage, or straw. You also need to avoid sudden changes in the fiber content of the feed ration to prevent digestive disorders. The energy requirement of the cattle is the main factor that drives the growth and fattening of the cattle. You need to provide enough energy to meet the maintenance and the production needs of the cattle, such as grains, byproducts, or fats. You also need to balance the energy levels to protein level to optimize the feed efficiency and the carcass quality. The protein requirement for the cattle is the essential component that builds the muscle and the tissues of the cattle. You have to provide adequate protein to support the growth and the development of the cattle, such as soya bean meal, cottonseed meal, or urea. You also need to supplement the protein with amino acids that are limiting in the feed ration, such as lysine or methionine. The mineral requirement of the cattle, a trace element that regulates metabolic and physiological functions of the cattle. You need to provide sufficient minerals to prevent the deficiencies and the imbalance of the cattle, such as salt, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, or zinc. You also need to adjust the mineral level according to the water and the feed sources of the feedlot. The vitamin requirement of the cattle is the organic compound that enhances immune and the reproductive system of the cattle. You need to provide enough vitamins to avoid the disease and disorders of the cattle, such as vitamin A, D, E, or B complex. You also need to consider the vitamin stability and availability in the feed ration. Health and welfare of the cattle. The fifth step to take to start a feedlot operation is to maintain the health and welfare of your cattle in the feedlot. You need to prevent and treat diseases, parasites, and injuries that may affect your cattle. You also need to provide adequate shades, ventilation, and bedding for your cattle. The disease of the cattle are the infectious and the non-infectious agents that cause the illness and the mortality of the cattle. You need to prevent this disease by vaccinating, deworming, and isolating your cattle. You also need to treat the disease by diagnosing, medicating, and recording your cattle. The parasites of the cattle are the external and the internal organisms that feed on the blood and tissue of the cattle. You need to prevent the parasites by controlling the flies, ticks, and worms that infest your cattle. You also need to treat the parasite by applying, injecting, or drenching your cattle. The injuries of the cattle are the physical or the behavioral changes that impair the welfare and the quality of the cattle. You need to prevent the injuries by handling, transporting, and slaughtering your cattle carefully and respect them. You also need to treat the injuries by cleaning, dressing, and stitching your cattle. The shade of the cattle is the protection from the direct sunlight that affects the comfort and performance of the cattle. You need to provide enough shade for your cattle by providing both natural and artificial structures, such as trees, roof, and taps. You also need to monitor the temperature and humidity of the feedlot to prevent heat stroke. You need to provide enough ventilation by using natural or mechanical methods such as wind, fans, or sprinklers. Marketing. The sixth and final step to start a feedlot operation is to market your cattle at the optimal time and price. You need to consider the carcass weight, fat content, grade, and quality of your cattle. You also need to follow the proper transportation and slaughter protocols for your cattle. The carcass weight of the cattle is the weight of the meat, bone, and fat after the slaughter and dressing of the cattle. It is the main factor that determines income and the yield of your operations. You need to aim for the optimal carcass weight that meets the market demands and the feedlot efficiency. The grade of the cattle is the specification of carcass based on the quality and the yield of the beef. It reflects the consumer preference and the market value of the cattle. You need to target the grade that matches the market specification and the feedlot performance of your cattle. Transportation of the cattle is the movement of the cattle from the feedlot to slaughterhouse or the livestock market. It affects the stress, shrinkage, and the bruising of the cattle. You need to minimize the transportation time and the distance by choosing nearby and reliable slaughterhouses for your cattle. You also need to follow the humane and sanitary methods of slaughter by complying with animal welfare and food and safety regulations. Cattle fattening can be a profitable and rewarding enterprise for cattle farmers, but it requires careful planning, management, and marketing. Thanks for viewing and hope you find this episode as a useful source of information. Stay tuned for the next update, which is tips for cattle pen fattening, as a continuation of this episode. If you have any clarification, please leave it in the comment box. You can also follow us on the various social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Bye bye.